Hi everyone, welcome to our first online edition of BarcelonaJS. We are back after the COVID pandemic, and as I said, this is the first time we're doing an online event, which is a bit weird for a technology group, but we do prefer meeting in person. Once the situation allows it, we will try to come back to our regular meetups, but for now we will continue to do our meetups online just to make sure that the community stays together, and our members have the chance to learn from each other as we always have done. And for this edition, we have two sponsors. The first one is Adevinta, who is helping us with the logistics required for this online meetup. And I have my colleague Helena, who is going to present Adevinta. So Helena.
Yes, hello to everyone and nice to meet you virtually. My name is Elena and I am working in the recruitment team at Adevinta Spain. For those who doesn't know who we are, Adevinta is a multinational company who have marketplaces in more than 15 countries. Here in Spain, our brands are InfoJobs, Milanuncios, Vivo, Fotocasa, Cochesimotos.net and Habitaclia. So if you want to know more information about who we are, about our projects, or if we have open roles, you can arrange a coffee with one of the front ends of Adevinta, Miguel Angel. You can find that link in the YouTube chat, and you can click and you can arrange the meetup, the meeting directly. So enjoy the meetup and have fun.
Thank you, Helena. We have another sponsor for today's meetup, which is Wallaby.js. They are offering for BarcelonaJS members 3 licenses: one Wallaby.js personal license and 2 Coca JS personal licenses. This will be raffled, and if you want to participate, we have a link. We will also tweet this link. For those of you who follow us on Twitter, the link is bit.ly/bcnjs-wallaby. It's going to be a form. You need to fill in your email address, name, and which of the 2 services you're interested in. And we're going to have a raffle, and we will announce the winner by the end of the week. That being said, I would like to introduce our first speaker, which is Adrian Bolonio. He's an experienced team lead and web accessibility advocate. He is from Spain, but he lives in Vienna for some reason. I moved from Spain to Spain. And he's going to talk today about testing web accessibility. So please welcome Adrian.
Well, thank you, Tudor, and thank you, BarcelonaJS, for having me today. And yes, let's talk about web accessibility. As you mentioned, I'm from Madrid, I'm from Spain, but I live in Vienna. I'm a team lead and a front-end developer at Willhaben, which is a company part from Adevinta Group. It's like Segunda Mano or Vivo in Austria. And I'm a strong accessibility advocate. You can find me almost everywhere under my surname. So let's talk accessibility. The first question that I always have every time that I make a talk is, what is this A11Y that you see? So this is the international acronym for accessibility. And this is because the word accessibility, there is 11 letters between the A and the Y. So that's why, and I'm going to use this from now on a lot. So why is so obvious in the real world that those 4 situations are wrong? I mean, in the first and in the second one, in the first and the second picture, there is a very steep ramp. In the third one, there is a ramp, and at the end, there is stairs. And the fourth one is a totally unusable ramp. So another situation, someone in a wheelchair arrives to a door and, okay, there is an accessible button, the door opens automatically, but surprise, there is stairs after the door. So why is this so obvious in the real world? Well, when we go to the online world, it's not that obvious that a website is not accessible. When we talk about web accessibility, we talk about not excluding people to use your products and services, and to develop for everyone, for users without disabilities and people with disabilities. So let's see an example in the online world. So you arrive to a online market, a e-commerce shop, and maybe you want to see your previous purchases, and you call the technical support, and then they can tell you something like, oh, you need to click in the button in the top right corner so you can see your purchases. Or you want to change your email address. So they can say something like, you need to click in the button with the engine icon. But for blind people, there is no such as top right corner. There is no such as button who looks like an engine. So we need to have this in mind when we develop our websites. Let me give you some numbers very quick. Around 2 years ago, we were 7.6 billion people in the world, and more than 1 billion people live with some form of visual impairment, either color blindness, use glasses for 10, 20%, or 100%, which is blind. So when we develop our e-commerce, our websites, our businesses, we want to reach as mass people as possible. And those people are as well your audience. So have this in mind when you develop your website. I'm not going to talk about developing web accessibility. I have a different talk called How Does Your Website Sound Like? You can look for it in the internet. But I'm going to talk about testing web accessibility. How can we make sure that what we develop is accessible? So automate test versus manual test. So automate tests are very cool. They can free up your whole QA department, your QA team, your testers from manual test every part of your application. But it's not magic. They cannot make your site accessible, or they cannot find everything. We cannot forget that only 20 to 50% of the accessibility issues can be detected automatically. So we need to understand the automate testing as part of a larger testing process where manual test is as important as automate test. So to prove this, I created a very simple application in React with 3 tiny components. So one is a button. The second one is a fake button, which is an anchor link with the role button. Never do this at home, kids. And the third one is an image. And in the entry point of the application, I put a bunch of accessibility errors. So let's see if we can find them together. What I do normally is divide my accessibility testing in 3 phases. So we can test during the development process, so while you are coding. Then you can maybe you arrive into a company or you inherit a code base that no one has ever touched accessibility. So maybe you want to test the whole thing as a one thing, the whole DOM structure. And as well, we've already talked about manual testing, which is important as well. So I'm going to show you some extensions that I use. So let's start with testing while we code. Since this is a React application base or React-based application, sorry, we are going to use some tools for React. I'm sure that there are some for Angular, Vue, Svelte, or any other JavaScript framework. So the first one is React Axe. Axe family is a family of tools, including React Axe. We will see more in this presentation, and it was built by Deque Labs. In this case, we have a React library, so we can install it as a developer dependency in our application. You can npm or yarn, add whatever you use. And you need to be sure that you call and you import this library only in an environment which is not production. So you don't want to expose this information to a production environment. What is this library doing? When you run your application in the browser, in this case, in the screenshot, we see Google Chrome, same with Firefox and Internet Explorer. If you open the developer console, you will see the accessibility issues that your website is having. So if you have several times the same issue, you will see them grouped as well. You will see the severity level assigned for each violation, from minor, moderate, serious, and critical. As well, you're going to see where is the violation, so in which HTML element in your DOM is the violation caused. And we see something which I think is very cool, is a direct link to dequeuniversity.com. This is a link to the official documentation of accessibility provided by Deque. So it's not the W3C, but it's provided by Deque. And you can see more information about the violation, what is it, and how to fix that. So again, I think it's pretty complete analysis. The second one is a linter. Okay, so for those who doesn't know what the linter is, and we are in BarcelonaJS, I hope everyone used this. A linter is mainly a config file where you say, hey, tell me that I'm wrong when I'm doing this. So you specify some rules, and the code editor is going to tell you that you're violating, or you are breaking those rules. You're doing something that you shouldn't be doing when you're typing your code. In this case, I'm using the JSX A11Y, so the accessibility plugin for ESLint or TSLint. It doesn't matter if you use pure JavaScript or TypeScript. There is for both. And I need to put it in my ESLint TRC JSON file. In the line number 2, I just include the plugin. And in line number 12, there is the recommended rules. So I extend the rules with the recommended rules of accessibility. With this one, it will be enough. But I tend to like to specify my own rules, because there are some rules that I can specify, some components that I want to skip, or some elements that I want to test in particular. So I prefer to extend the node with my own rules. What is it doing? Again, while you're coding, the code editor, in my case Visual Code, is telling me with this wavy underline, the red wavy underline, that I'm doing something wrong. So if I hover with my mouse, this message is gonna pop up. So in this case, I'm putting an on-click handler in a div, which is a non-interactive element. So this is something that you should not do. As well, you will see those rules or those violations in the terminal when you run your application. The third one, which is probably my favorite and something that we all should do, is to write unit tests. So for JavaScript, there is a very cool library called Jest. It's a library to write unit tests, or end-to-end, mainly for unit tests. And the Axe family has a plugin for this Jest library. So again, we install it as a developer dependency in our application, and you need to write a very simple test. So in this case, I'm importing the whole app, so everything that comes from the entry point of the app, and I'm using the React DOM server to convert this app to a string. And I launch, or I pass the string to the Axe engine. And of course, I expect not to have violations. So when I go to the terminal and I do npm run test or yarn, again, whatever you're using, I run the test, and on those violations that we've already seen in the linter and the React Axe. I don't have alt description in the images. I'm using on-click handler in non-interactive elements. In this case, I'm using ARIA roles that are custom. So those are stated here. The same as React Axe, we have where is the error, what is the violation, and as well a direct link to Deque University to learn more about how to fix these violations. So these are the three tools, mainly the tools that I use every day while I code in my development process. But sometimes you tend to think that you're done, which is mainly wrong. Or you can inherit a code base, maybe, and you want to say, I want to pass that test for the full URL, right? The full page, instead of the code. So we can test the whole DOM structure. Again, back to the Axe family, we have Axe CLI, and you need to install this time globally in your machine. Once you install it globally, you can use it in the terminal. Easy to use, Axe followed by the URL that you want to test, and it's going to perform a Chrome headless instance and running the whole test. So you can see that it's pretty much exactly the same. Where is the error? What is the violation? And a direct link to the University back to the official documentation from them. Very similar application, very similar library is PA11Y. Back again, we need to install it globally in our machine. You can run it the same way as the Axe. So PA11Y followed by the URL that you want to test, and it's going to perform tests. In this case, I don't know if it's a Chrome headless, definitely a headless browser, and it's going to tell you what is the error. In this case, it's going to give you even the principle that is going to be violated, or it's been violated. It's going to give you a full map of the DOM and the exact element that is violating the accessibility rule. We don't have, of course, a direct link to the documentation because it's developed by a different company. And as well, you can run this over localhost, so you don't need to you don't need a test environment or a production environment for that. Another cool thing from this library is that they have a CI, because you maybe think, I have a lot of URLs to test. I don't want to go one by one to the terminal, and I don't want to create my own script. So you can tell the CI is going to look to a JSON file in the root of your application, and you can define some parameters. So in this case, I have 3 URLs. The same one, I'm using the Stack Overflow website. The first one is just plain. The second one, I'm having a timeout, and I'm taking a screen capture. In the third one, which is, I think, is the tricky part, or the funny part here, I can perform actions. So I can either click, I can either navigate, I can wait until an element with an ID or a class is visible and loaded, and I can take screen captures. What do I need these screen captures? I'm going to show you how it runs. Maybe you have a visual regression test engine, so you can test the I don't know, the style of the website, or maybe you want to test some components in particular. But or maybe for reporting purposes, so you want to include these screenshots. But it's doing exactly the same as the PA11Y without the CI. So it's going to run the 3 tests. It's going to show you exactly the same, and we can see that in the root folder of the application, there are the captures, the screen captures. Again, maybe for reporting or automate processes. Lighthouse. Lighthouse is a application, a library, or whatever you want to call it, that is developed by Google. It is included in every Google Chrome. It used to be called Audit, and now it's called Lighthouse under the development tools. And you can run some tests over the website, but you can use it as well in the terminal. So you can use it in your maybe in your continuous delivery pipeline, or whatever you want to use it for, reporting again, or automate test purposes. So you need to install it globally in your machine, the same as the previous ones, and you can run it Lighthouse followed by the URL that you want to test. In this case, I'm using --view because what Lighthouse is doing is generating an HTML report. And I want to show it, I want to display it as soon as it's finished. In this case, instead of a headless Chrome, it's going to run a full instance of a Google Chrome, and it's going to do a lot of tests, performance tests, accessibility tests, no internet performance, JavaScript, responsiveness, a lot of tests, and it's going to create a HTML report. Once it's done with the --view, you will see the report, and you can click in the accessibility option, and you can see again what are the errors, a bit of information on how to solve the error. Again, in this case, is the official documentation by Google about the accessibility, and you can find more about these issues. So those are the 3 applications or 3 libraries that I use to test the whole DOM structure. And for me, in my opinion, the main feature, which I already mentioned it, for the first one is that they have a direct link to the documentation at Eco University, right? The second one, you can have this PI11YCI with config options, so you can perform actions, or you can take screen captures for this visual regression test, maybe. Or in Lighthouse, you have this HTML report, or you can dump it to a JSON file, so you can use it either for reporting purposes, or you can put this into your delivery or deployment pipeline, so you can stop code to be in production that is not accessible. So I think it's a very, very complete pipeline that you can build with all these libraries. But at the beginning, I mentioned that automate tests are very important, but are not the only thing. So this is the starting point. And manual tests are as important as the automate tests. So I'm going to show you some extensions that I use. In this case, I'm using Google Chrome. Firefox has almost the same, pretty much the same, I believe. I don't know if the last one it is, but I use the same extensions in Chrome. Internet Explorer is a different world, but I'm going to show you some. So back to the Axe family. The first one is the Axe Chrome extension. You can find this extension under the development tools of the browser. So you can click in Analyze. It's going to perform the same code that it was in React Axe and in the Jest Axe and in the Axe in the terminal, and I'm going to display it in a more visual way. So you can have what is the error and what element is the one who's violating the accessibility rule. Of course, you have the impact, again, minor, critical, moderate, and you have this learn more code link, that you have, again, direct link to the Eco University. Very similar extension is ARC Toolkit. ARC Toolkit, you can find it as well under the development tools. So same as the Axe one. You can see a bunch of tests that you can perform. So you can run the test groups. In this case, I'm going to focus in images. So I want to see what images doesn't have an alt text. So if I click in the image, I go directly to the DOM structure. And if I scroll in the window, it's going to be highlighted. So it's going to be very easy for me to identify those images that doesn't have any alt text. Another important thing is tab order. The tab order will determine, let me rephrase this. People with visually impairments, normally, they don't use your website navigating with a mouse. Normally, they use a keyboard or a special keyboard. And mainly, they use the tab key. So the tab order of your website needs to be consistent with the content of your website. So this extension allows us to create a full map of these tab orders, so you can identify if this flow is consistent and is correct with the content of your website. So it's not jumping around from header to footer and it's skipping something that you maybe made a mistake and you put an area hidden false, or maybe you use the tab index -1. So you can see a lot of errors here. And again, manual testing. You will not be able to do this with an automate test. Wave. Wave, for me, is the most complete extension. So if you ask me if I need to install only one, this is the one that I would recommend you. This is under the extension bar, and if you click, immediately there will be a test analysis done. So you will see all the errors you have visually highlighted in the window. You can see as well the structure of the headings, H1, H2, H3, very important for SEO as well. You can see the color contrast, if it's a AA or AAA, so if it's failing. You can deactivate the whole styles, the whole CSS out, so you can see if the HTML and the content is really, the order is relevant. Or you can even inspect the code if you want to dig a bit more into the code. So I think it's the most complete one that you can use. But I like to complement with some other. But we should not only do tests, but it's very important that you put yourself into the skin of someone who is visually impaired. So I'm going to show you a visual simulator. It's called No Coffee. And what it's doing is simulating how visually impaired people will see your website. So maybe someone forgot their glasses at home and they're gonna see your website a bit blurry. So you need to be sure that the size of your text and the colors of your text are relevant enough to be seen every time. Maybe you have glares in your eyes or flutters. No, some people have some flutters in their eyes. Or maybe colorblind. So maybe people will see colors distorted. Or maybe a different illnesses. So central view, peripheral, glaucoma, retinal detachment, a lot of visual impairments that can be simulated with this extension. So you can see how those people will see your website. Very important to put yourself in the shoes or in the skin of those people. So those are the tools that I normally use to test. Again, you can test while you code, which again, I think is the first step to stop shipping code to production, even to test environments that is not accessible. Maybe you inherit a code base. Maybe you are moving to a team with a mature product, and you want to test the whole DOM of a URL. So you can use those tools in the terminal, or you can use those tools in your deployment pipeline to stop non-accessible code to be in production. And again, we talk about manual test as important as the automate test. So those are the extensions that I normally use in my daily process. The small application that I created to show you some of them is under my GitHub account. And recently in the Arctic Vault, as any other open source project, you can see the slides of this and any other talk that I gave under speakerdeck.com/Bolonio, my surname. If you don't like to watch again the talk or see the slides, I wrote about the 3 parts of this talk in my blog, so you can read it and copy paste the code and play around in your terminal. I want to take advantage as well and propose and maybe encourage you to take a free course officially designed by the W3C under edX. It's called Introduction to Web Accessibility. It's not for technical people. It's for everyone who wants to take an introduction to web accessibility. And I want to leave with a couple of sentences that I think, what I read and I thought they were really, really important. The first one said, it's not just about disabled users being able to access your website. It's about everyone being able to access your website. It doesn't matter if it's disabled or not. You can be situational disabled. You maybe forgot your glasses at home, or maybe you don't have your mouse with you, or maybe you drop your computer and your screen is broken. Maybe you have kids and then you have your kid in one arm and then you need to use the website navigating with the tab with the other hand. So you can be situational disabled. But more important is, we don't need to think about, we need to make this website disabled for those people who are, we don't have to make this website accessible for those people who are disabled. We need to make this website accessible for everyone. It's the same as when we watch videos and it needs to be captioned or subtitled, not for people who's deaf. It's just for everyone. Normally, when I am in a conference in a large room, I would love to have subtitles because I cannot see correctly the screen. So we need to think about this when we develop anything. Doesn't matter if it's in the online world, web, or a table or a chair. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be usable for everyone. Why do I say that? Because accessibility is not a feature. It was never a feature and it will never be a feature. Disability is not an option. You don't choose to be disabled. So don't treat accessibility as a feature, and let's include accessibility as a development process, the same as we do with testing, the same as we do with UX review, the same as we do with pair programming and mob programming, and then specification with our POs or PM. It needs to be naturally included in our development process, because it doesn't take time. Writing an alt text to an image, writing an ARIA label to a button which is not meaningful enough, for example, the X button, maybe close the current window in the ARIA label. And it's not expensive because HTML provides with everything you need. You don't need any external library who costs anything. So let's treat accessibility as part of our development process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. We have one question. I'm going to read it out loud for you.
Go on.
Sorry, I got lost in the many screens that I have open. So
no problem.
Yeah, the question is, how do you rate the Google Chrome accessibility audits?
Okay, good question, because of course, when we put our websites in the online world, Daddy Google is very important for SEO and accessibility, right? Since they changed the new rates for the Google page index and the Dev Vitals, I don't know if you're familiar with this one, they are rating accessibility a bit higher. But there is a very good article that I recommend. Maybe I can copy and paste it in the chat, from Manuel Matusovic, and he made the most inaccessible website with 100% score in the Google audits. So Google's page index and Google audits in Lighthouse, they are very good. They found a lot of things, but this is only the first step in your accessibility process. So if you want to pass it and you're 100%, very good. You're in the good path, but you cannot stop there. So I think it's important to test against Google and any other. Some other people ask me some other time, like, oh, which one do you recommend? And I say, I recommend every, because I think you should use more than one. You should not stop in only one. And as well, I'm gonna copy and paste this article so you can read it. Prasan, I think you were the one who asked. And I'm gonna send you another link, which is both for Manuel Matusovic, who said, if you make your website accessible, it's gonna be inaccessible for someone. Definitely is very difficult to make accessible for everyone. But what we need to create is the most accessible as possible. Okay, maybe your logo doesn't comply with AA or AAA, your corporate image, or you cannot make it accessible for whatever reason, but at least as much accessible as possible. I hope I answer your question.
Cool, thank you. If you can tweet the links that you are talking about, can you put them in a tweet and tweet them to BarcelonaJS so we can retweet them to all our members?
Will do.
Because in a YouTube chat, they may get lost.
Okay, I will tweet about them.
Cool. So thank you, Adrian.
Thank you again.
And that being said, we are moving to our second speaker for today. It's Tim, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Suchanek. Tim founded the AI painting app Wizard and joined Prisma as the first employee. And he is going to talk today about Prisma 2, modern database tools for Node.js and TypeScript. So please welcome Tim.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Tudor, and thanks for the organization, everyone involved, Jan, Tudor, Carlotta, Helena, and everyone else to make this happen, because I think such a remote event is for sure something new and a new challenge. Yeah, so I'm Tim. I'm a software engineer in Berlin, and I'm leading the TypeScript efforts here in Berlin at Prisma. Prisma is an open source company focusing on database tooling. You can reach out to me at Tim Suchanek on Twitter. By the way, I'm monitoring Twitter during the talk, so if you have any questions, you can just tweet to me directly. What I want to mostly answer today, first of all, why am I here and why Prisma? What problem is Prisma actually solving? How are we solving that problem? And what do you get out of it? So Prisma, as the title says, is focusing on database tools for Node.js and TypeScript. And I will show you today that, oh God, I need to disable notifications. I will show you today that we don't need to use TypeScript, but we can to get the value out of this. It's 2020 and we want to build a web app. So in order to build a web app, we need to make a few decisions. And there are a couple of tough decisions, actually. One of them is, for example, which programming environment do we want to use? In the front end, it's quite simple. We have to basically use JavaScript because that's the only thing browsers speak. But in the backend, we can do what we want. And as we're in BarcelonaJS, it's quite simple. We want to use Node.js in the backend. Okay, so we made that big decision. That's already good. That helps us to move forward. But there's another big decision, which is oftentimes discussed. Should we build a single page application or should we use server-side rendering? Hey, the email app recently showed that server-side rendering is still a thing. And there is a lot of stuff out there. There are a lot of resources. There are a lot of opinions, etc. Today, we will just say yes. We will say yes to this or question. We will do all of them. But there's another big question, and that is actually how to deal with data. Dealing with data is not trivial, especially as now the amount of databases is basically exploding. So while we have the more traditional databases like Postgres, MySQL, which are relational databases, they kind of feel not as always the perfect fit from Node.js. Why? Because if you directly use them, let's say with a native driver from Postgres, you have to write an SQL string in your programming language, but that's not, I hope, the developer experience that we all strive for. On the other hand, it's really well proven these databases work. And once you need to change something in your schema, let's say you need to rename a column, you can do that quite easily. However, again, it's not really feeling natural from a Node.js perspective. You need to know concepts like a foreign key, a join. You need to learn SQL. Learning SQL is for sure a good idea, but somehow it doesn't really feel natural from Node.js. And there is the other contestant on the other side, NoSQL databases. And for sure, one of the most famous one is Mongo. Mongo has, I think, 1 million downloads per month, and it is really used a lot in Node.js. Why? Because Mongo is JSON. You can just take a JSON object from JavaScript, post it in there, and that's it. So in the end, a JSON object just becomes a document in a Mongo database, and a document is then stored in a collection. So it's really nice to get started. It's really simple. It has a nice API that feels natural from Node.js. However, there are also trade-offs. So concretely, if you want to evolve your schema later, let's say you need to add a field, you need to rename a field, then it's a lot of hassle and you need to loop over all your data. So this is a tough decision. And Prisma helps you with this decision. But in order to really answer this, let's look into your data model. Today, we will build a simple block example. We will build a REST API and a full stack application with a block. And in order to really understand what this block is about, in other words, how this block idea, how this like business domain or real world idea maps to the software actually, in order to understand that, we should model our relationships and data structures in our application. And there I just want to cite Linus Torvalds. Bad programmers worry about the code. Good programmers worry about data structures and their relationships. And I couldn't agree more. In the beginning, it's very cheap to just iterate on your data model. You haven't written any code yet. It's really simple to do. But of course, as soon as you have written code, as soon as you have an implementation, iterating over that is actually quite some work. So let's dive into it. This is actually my last slide today. And from now on, we just have code. As I said, we will implement a REST API and a full stack application. And as I also just said, oh, data modeling is so important. We should do data modeling. Because of that, with Prisma, we make data modeling as easy as possible. And we created our own language to model data. That's the schema definition language. So let's just model something. Let's create something. We have a simple project here. We have an Express application. There are two dependencies we have to install. It's the Prisma CLI and the Prisma client. The client is actually the thing that connects to the database that allows us to call the database from Node.js. So in order to start, we are really having a fresh project here. It's basically nothing yet. We can just say, okay, we have the Prisma directory. We create a schema Prisma file, and we now need to provide a couple of things here. One thing is the provider, the data source. As you see right now, we support MySQL, PostgreSQLite. We are working on Mongo support. Then we now need to provide a database URL here. Let's just save the SQLite database to dev.db. Next stop is the Prisma client needs to be generated based on this schema that we define here. And we can just provide that by using the provider field and say, hey, this is the Prisma client that we want, Prisma JavaScript client. You could theoretically have other generators like generating data visualization, for example. So as I said, we want to build a block, and in a block, what do we have? We have users, we have posts, and we have comments. So let's start. We just can write this down. We have an int ID here. It has a default value, an auto increment, so we don't need to choose IDs in our application. Let's say a user has a required name, has an email, and the email has a unique constraint. Makes sense. Let's continue with post. So a post also has an ID, has maybe a title, and has some content. And let's continue with our comment model here. Again, this can look very similar. Let's add a optional string field, for example, called text. And this is nice, but I just talked about relations. How can we now connect these things with each other? That's quite simple. In the post, in the user model, we can just say posts, and we can type this. And this is all I type. What I'm doing now is just Command S, and look what's happening. The VS Code extension from Prisma just created this for us. They created this user ID field here and the user back relation. What is the back relation? So the forward relation is basically from user to post. One user has many posts. And again, one post is related to one user. And again, we can move forward here. We can say one post has many comments. So we say comment, again, an array syntax here, bam, and the extension does the job for us. And again, we can just fairly naturally just talk about this, write this down, and build our data model here. Okay, and that's basically it. Now we have to tell Prisma somehow to create a database. And what we use for that is called a tool called Prisma Migrate. And Prisma Migrate creates a migration for us and applies that migration. So we will execute this. We don't have the database yet. Please create it. There we go. And let's actually look into this, what Prisma just created for us. We just opened this with Table Plus, which is a database UI, basically. And we basically have exactly what we provided in the schema file. We have like the comments with ID, title, text, etc. So that's nice. Let's create some data. In order to create data, we need a Prisma client. We need to generate it. So concretely, we need to take the schema that we have and generate the code for that to use the client. And in order to use it, let's just import it here. So we say Prisma client. We require it from @prisma/client. And let's just have a simple async wrapper, because there's still no top-level array. So we say Prisma client, and so let's see what we got here. We get auto-completion. And this is really an important message I want to get across here. So we get all this nice auto-completion, although we are not using TypeScript. So I intentionally started this Express application just with JavaScript. And later in the full stack application, we will use TypeScript. But here I just want to show you this auto-completion that we get here. All of this is powered by TypeScript. But as a developer, we don't have to care where this comes from. It just matters that we have it. So let's create a user. And again, you see all of this auto-completion always. I do Control space to trigger that. And I can now create posts, for example. Actually, I can also provide an array here. What can we do here? We can have some content, lorem, title, ipsum, and a post can even have comments. Again, a comment can have a comment title. That's nice. Let's create a few more posts. One more here, lorem 2 and ipsum 2, comment title 2. Nice. So let's execute this. We do main node main.js, and we see Bob has just been created. And I just want to show a nice feature here. We can have nice error handling, like with ANSI colors, etc. Concretely, if we do this execution again, we will get a unique constraint violation because the email field is, as we mentioned it, as we defined it earlier in the schema, is unique. So let's execute this again. And what do we get? Yeah, we get this nice error here that says unique constraint failed on the field's email. Makes sense. So we just call it bob2@hey.com. And yeah, there we go. So that's nice. Now we have some data. And yeah, let's actually query this data. So here we have a very simple Express application setup. This is nothing fancy. We just use a plugin for nice async error handling. That's it. And let's use the client here. So we say Prisma, new Prisma client. That's it so far. And let's implement our first REST controller. So what we say here is, okay, users. Let's say we want to get the users on /get users. What do? We can say Prisma user find many. Okay, nice, awesome. And in Express, you then say REST JSON users. Okay, so let's start this. I will start this with a simple node env, so we can restart. Actually, I will just make sure that all node processes are not running. And now, yeah, we can query this. Let's just use the HTTP HTTP CLI. Let's try it out. And yep, we get the user spec. That's exactly what we want. Let's say we want to limit this to only one user. So we would, for example, say here in the URL, take one. And Express that ends up, and again, take is a is an auto-completed value here. And Express this take one ends up in the query, I think. So we could just say query take. Let's try it out. Oh, we get an error. And what it says is the following. Argument take got invalid value 1 on Prisma find many user, provided string expected int. So very simple. What we have to do here, it's a pretty clear error message, I would say. We have to typecast this. Let's try again. And there we go. This works. So we could just parameterize this fairly easily. So let's say we want to create a user now. So we say Prisma user create. We need data in here. What do we have? Again, auto-completion shows us. We need an email, we need a name. And what I will just do here, I will just take the request body. Normally, may want to do a little bit of validation, but this is actually a good point. You may wonder, oh God, I'm just passing in this wild data from the internet in the Prisma client. It's dangerous. Actually, Prisma client has validation built in, and we will see it in a bit. And this is already it. So we can just send back this user here. Let's try this out. I prepared this simple query here. So we have a name and email, and we post it to localhost 4,000 users. And there we go. Again, if we would query this again, There's a unique constraint defined for email, so this will error. And it's quite nice because we get this nice error here in development time. It tells us exactly which line it is. It's line 18. So let's see. Yep, it's line 18 here. And unique constraint failed on the field's email. So this is nice. We now just implemented in a few minutes a simple REST API. And we saw that, yeah, I would say it feels quite natural. We didn't have to deal with any unique, with any foreign key, with any SQL string in our code here. We got JSON in, JSON out. Okay, now we will do something a little bit more sophisticated. We will build a full stack application. Concretely, we will use Next.js. In case you don't know Next.js, it's a framework around React. It's something like Gatsby or Create React App, but much more powerful. And there's a particular feature in Next.js that I want to showcase today. Concretely, Next.js in a recent release allows you to query Node.js code or run Node.js code in the same file where you run the front-end code. Some people may be reminded to the old days of Meteor.js. It's in a similar direction, but different. So and in this example, we will use TypeScript. Next ships with TypeScript support, and you can just define a route with TypeScript. So I just cloned the fresh Next.js getting started project, and let's check it out what it has. So we just do yarn dev in here. The next server starts, and we can check it out in the browser. And we will see that this thing runs. Yeah. And so in order to understand this magic stuff that I just talked about, Node.js and frontend in the same file, you might get scared a bit. So let's unpack this and let's see what this is about. If you see this next example here, they, for example, have a route /posts and then the post name or post ID. And let's look into the implementation of that, how that works. So concretely, Next is based on conventions. It is, for example, a file system-based router. That means if I have a different page name or folder name here, that's also how it gets mapped to the URLs in the end. And what they have here in a file, they have the convention that they say the default export has to be a component. And that component now somehow gets some props passed in, but where do these props come from? And that's exactly where these two functions come into play, getStaticPaths and getStaticProps. Concretely, as soon as a URL is called, let's say we have /ssgssr, what is happening is that the getStaticProps function is being called. It gets this params parameter, and this params object here has an ID. Where does the ID come from? It comes from the file name. We call it with the bracket id.js. And what can we do now? We can take that ID and we can actually go to our database or our storage, whatever. In this case, they go to the file system. And this is exactly what I have been talking about. Here we have actual front-end React code. This runs in the front end. You can, whatever, access the window in here. But here we have Node.js code. This is a new feature, again, that the Next team developed, that they are parsing these different parts into different files. And what does that mean for us? For us, that obviously means we can directly query with Prisma client in the same file. And another important part here is getStaticPaths. So what is that about? Let's say I have a blog, I have a couple of posts, and how can I tell Next now if it like builds everything and statically spits out some static assets that I can put in a CDN? How can I tell Next which posts I have? And that's exactly what getStaticPaths is about. We just return an array of these params with the ID, and the Next framework can just take that and build all of these URLs out. So there we got it. We have these three parts. We have the component, we have getStaticPaths to know which URLs do we even have, and we have getStaticProps, which actually fetches the data that we need. As I just said, Next supports TypeScript. And I just added one TSX file already. So that is the file extension you have if you have a TypeScript with JSX in there. And yeah, we can just turn these other files also in .ts or TSX. I didn't spend the time on that. I just created this file and yeah, prepared something very simple here. It's basically just the post example turned into users, and I turned on the TypeScript button, so to say. So what do we have here? We're querying our users. And again, we have a get static paths here that returns all the paths that we want. And here we have something interesting going on, which is we just need the IDs of the users, right? We don't need, for example, the email. And that would be really nice if we could tell the Prisma client, hey, just give us the ID. And what we can do here, we can just use this select feature. And that's a powerful feature. This feature basically says only return the ID. Don't return anything else. I would just want the ID. So I could, for example, say, just return the email. And suddenly we get this. Property ID does not exist on that type. And now we're in the business of type safety. And to throw some buzzwords, zero cost type safety. It's basically zero cost because we didn't have to write any TypeScript. Yes, this is basically the only TypeScript we have in here. Apart from that, that's it. So Prisma client is fully type safe, and the return type, that's a really key thing to understand here. And that's something, by the way, that is not possible in any other language right now, because TypeScript has a very, very modern type system. It comes from C#, Delphi. They're really smart people working on it at Microsoft. This is not possible in any other language, and there's no other library to our knowledge that does this. What concretely? Typing the result here based on a query that we have in here. So again, we're now not talking about a string anymore. We're talking about a nice, understandable JSON API here that we can nicely use in JavaScript. We get all the IntelliSense, we get all the auto-completion, everything. And the result is typed. So the types here now say ID number. I could also add a name in here and say name true. And then we also have that in the type. So that's a really powerful feature. And this is just mapping the IDs out. And yeah, what is get static props doing? It gets the ID here, and it just uses the find one and returns this user in the props here, and that gets passed in here. And now we get to the beauty of, some people call it full stack type safety. It's quite simple. Let's look into this. User dot, what do we have here? Exactly, type safety. And that type safety that comes directly from this, what this function returns, TypeScript infers the types for us. This is a bit ugly, but this is all you have to write. As soon as you have this written, this is a utility exported by Next. As soon as you have this written, the types basically flow. What do I mean by that? They flow in that regard that we could now say, we are, for example, interested in the posts. And what do we get? Yeah, we get users and the posts. Again, type safety. And again, bam, there we have it in the front end. In the component, we have the posts here. So let's quickly check out what this component actually renders so we understand it a bit better. We have users here. What is this? Yeah, unable to open database. Why? Because we don't even have any database in this project yet. We need to quickly copy it over. If you have a multi-project setup like this one, normally I would rather recommend using Learner or PNPM or Yarn workspaces, and then you just have one dedicated package that exports the client and you can reuse it. But this should actually work. Yeah, there we go. So we have the name and the email. And yeah, let's actually add the posts now. It would be nice to know for each user which posts they created. And in a traditional setting, you would now have to go to many layers. You have to create the API and so on. You may even lose type safety unless you use something like GraphQL. And what we want to do here, again, I already showed you, we have this include syntax, which is something different than select. Include is additive. Select is basically saying, this is the only thing I want to query. But here we use include, so we get additionally to the user, we get the posts. And let's use them. So we can say posts, user posts, map p, for example. This is very ugly markup. And let's say post dot title. It may be that a user doesn't have posts. And I think that's already it. Let's look into this. Yes, we have the posts. And again, we could even go further. We could even say, no, we don't just want the posts. We even want the comments. So we would say include here again, and so on. So you see what this is about. You can just arbitrarily deep query the data, and we get the comments here. So in the front end, we could actually just log out the user, look into this, and we would see, yes, that's the user with the post, and the posts they should have comments. Okay, if they don't have comments, there might just not be any comments defined anyway. So what I just wanted to show you is that we could easily query new data. We could easily get that into the front end. And this, I would say, feels quite natural. So again, you don't need to know about the foreign keys. Prisma is taking care of it. Prisma is also making sure that you have proper migrations, that the database is updated as soon as you change something in your schema. One last thing that I want to show you, we have like 3 minutes left, is a nice tool called Prisma Studio. Prisma Studio is an experimental mode, but I still want to show it to you. It's a nice database UI, basically, where you see your data. And while we have the traditional table views where you can see, aha, I have multiple posts, etc., there's a quite nice feature, which is the tree view. And you can basically see, okay, for each user, I have posts. A post, what does a post have? It has comments, etc. So this way, again, we can fairly naturally explore our API. Under the hood, we're actually using SQLite. Again, that entails tables, columns, etc. But here we can just think about it as like a JSON structure, which is much more natural from Node.js. So let's come back to our original questions. So what problem do we have and how do we solve it and why? So the problem is really, we want to deal with data from Node.js, and it should really feel as natural as possible. We don't want to write SQL anymore in 2020. And we want a tool that gives us a nice abstraction so we can model data. We can just think about the data model as a higher level abstraction. So we're not stuck with this lower level abstraction. And as we just saw with Prisma, we can model our data. We have this schema file here that allows you to do that. And again, what do I get out of this? How does this actually look like? We just saw that we get type safety. And even though we may not want to use TypeScript, which is totally fine, I'm a big fan of TypeScript. I highly recommend it, but you don't have to. The type safety here is a huge benefit, and you get increased developer experience and productivity because you will just not access a field that doesn't exist. You can easily refactor your API if you need to rename something, etc. So that's it's from my side. Thanks a lot for your attention, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the questions.
Hey, thank you, Tim. I'm once again lost in the many screens, but I got to the questions. So the first one is, how different is Prisma in comparison with GraphQL?
That's a good question. So GraphQL is a protocol definition that helps you to get data between over the network, basically, and it gives you a type system. That's nice. Prisma is agnostic to things like GraphQL, REST, etc. That means you can create your API using Prisma client. A typical example we show is actually implementing a GraphQL API with Prisma. I didn't show it today to really just focus on the Prisma client part. But what I can just recommend is checking out Nexus. Nexus is a code-first GraphQL server implementation that makes it very easy to use or to expose the capabilities of Prisma as a GraphQL API.
Cool. Second question. The structure of the Prisma files reminds me of loopback.js and the models definitions. What are the inspirations used to build Prisma?
Yeah, loopback.js is also an awesome project. The concrete model definition, there we have not been inspired by loopback. I don't even know how it looks like there, but that mostly came from our background, which is GraphQL. So I just mentioned GraphQL briefly today, but the company Prisma has some history with GraphQL, and we used to only expose a GraphQL interface. And if you actually look into the schema definition of GraphQL, if you look into SDL, you will see that the our schema definition language is inspired by that. However, we adjusted it. For example, we turned things around. GraphQL has everything optional by default, and you have to always provide the exclamation mark to say it is required. That makes sense in the GraphQL context. In the database context, you rather want to define it the other way around, so we turned it around, and as you see, the syntax is maybe a bit more cleaned up. But I think we mostly got inspired in that regard from the GraphQL definition. Yeah.
Cool. Another one. How are the queries internally built? How do you tackle having efficient queries on complex models?
That's an excellent question. Something I didn't mention at all, but now is the time. The core of Prisma is not written in JavaScript, but in Rust. So actually, you could say the JavaScript part is a thin wrapper around the Rust part. Rust is a fast language. And concretely, in Rust, we have a so-called query builder, query planner. So it basically looks into what requirements do you have, how deeply nested is your query, and it basically takes that and turns it into an efficient query as much as possible. A big efficiency problem that you oftentimes have is the so-called N+1 problem. What is it? If you have GraphQL and you need to deeply nested query things, and you oftentimes create, let's say I have one user, and I have n posts related to the user, then you oftentimes need to do n+1 queries. Prisma solves that by using something called the data loader pattern. There's also this Node.js library data loader, which does something similar. So in other words, it batches things together so that we don't shoot like, let's say we have 1,000 posts, we don't shoot 1,000 queries to the database, but just maybe 2 queries, one to fetch all the users and then another one to fetch all the posts. So yeah, the query engine is basically highly optimizing this. And why do we write this in Rust? It's also because, yeah, Prisma is more and more actually becoming a database. We have things under the hood like, yes, we support MySQL and so on. But what will also come one day is that with Prisma, you can deal with multiple databases at the same time. And we have all the right stepping stones that we could theoretically do joins between different data sources.
Cool. Thank you. We have one more question. Will Prisma have support for Deno or just Node.js?
Right now, we just have Node.js support. Deno is actually one of the most requested features right now. I still don't know if anyone is already using it in production. We have an issue for that. You can check it out. Just go on github.com/prisma/prisma. And there just type in Deno and you will see the issue and just whatever +1 it or write down your use case for sure. We could easily add that. We just didn't do it yet as we didn't see yet if anyone uses Deno in production, but we are happy to add that.
I'm also curious who actually uses Deno in production. I have a question of my own.
Yeah.
So thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. And I've looked over the Prisma.io site, and I see that you're only offering support for visual code for like editor support. How about Vim? How about me? How about people that use Vim?
We have a Vim plugin. So concretely, there's a language service. So we have implemented a language service for the schema mostly. And that language service is there. There is a Vim plugin based on that. There is, I think, even an IntelliJ plugin. But VS Code is for sure the one where we put most effort in. That is also part of our official sprint process. But we have a Vim plugin, and can also try that out.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. As I said before, very interesting talks from both Tim and Adrian. Thank you for joining the very first edition of BarcelonaJS. We will be following recommendations from the health authorities. So until the situation clears, we will continue with our meetings online, although it's not the same experience. If this would have been a traditional, so to speak, BarcelonaJS event, now we would all be moving to the kitchen to have pizza and beer. So that's a bit of a loss.
Then
but,
you owe us a beer and some pizza.
Yeah. A Paulaner, no, because it's kind of like in the middle. It's Bavaria, you're in Austria, he's in Berlin, so Paulaner is Bavarian beer. It's kind of like in the middle. No, it's still Weiss beer, should work. So thank you everyone, and see you around. And please follow our Twitter at BCNJS, and because we keep tweeting information, and as we have, and if you have any cool project that you've been working on or something that you would like to share with the community, we're always looking for new speakers. So hit us up, and we can help you with your slides and everything. So thank you everybody. Thank you, team. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Adevinta, for supporting us. So
ciao.
Yeah, bye.